It's been a while, but I just thought I'd better do a bit of an update on the white 928S, GTS, I should say, about what's been happening and how I've got on with the car. It's been interesting. I think the last video I did was when we picked it up. Of course, the car was originally a Singapore car and in New Zealand for quite a while. And thankfully in New Zealand there's plenty of documented records of service, in fact a booklet of the stuff and the kilometres from when it was there, and then I bought it out of there last year. It spent a good part of that time, it seems, sitting on the dock in Wollongong trying to get through customs because it came out of a shed and they said it was dusty and a biosecurity threat to Australia, so that took some time for them to clean it and accept that it was okay to bring into the country. And then, of course, last video I was driving at home, sight unseen, jump started and sort of put a bit of petrol in it and just sort of took off to see what would happen. The dashboard, in fairness, I don't think I've ever seen so many warning lights at the time. They all seem to be sort of alerts as opposed to, on the dash itself. They were just like, the tyre pressure's this and the oil's low and God knows what else was flashing at me. But it made it home. And the next morning, in the cold light of day, you sort of assess it. And that's where we found that actually it looked really cool. It was very clean, very straight, and I suppose very dirty. So I set about, just pulling it apart and cleaning it out and fixing all the little bits and pieces that I knew about that were just the trunk lid lock and various other things, just making it work. And then mostly one of my favourite days of doing what I do is the day that the car turns up and you start pulling it apart. Delivered too. I wonder if they'll come off easily or they won't. And biosecurity, of course. So yeah, they've used tape that comes off and leaves a nice glue mark as well. Grey leather, so that's good. The carpets kind of look good. GTS looks super cool. I'll just keep cleaning up. I have no idea what these are. These are in the back. They're obviously panels that sit underneath the car in some shape or form. You get a bit of a look at the panels, the wheels, just the glass, and everything looks so more or less clean and original now. And then took it down to Bruce in Brookvale for a bit of a post-purchase, pre-purchase inspection, where he identified a bunch of stuff, but nothing too frightening, in fairness. It actually wasn't too frightening. And there were some other bits and pieces that we agreed to do. I think we set a budget of $5,000, and suffice to say, at the end the bill wasn't $5,000. 13 pages I have of invoice when it came back from Bruce, and most of those are just Bruce explaining his encyclopedic knowledge of 928s and almost justifying, I guess, why he did what he did. But fantastic reading for any 928S owner in terms of the sort of things that need to be done. But all that service, which seemed to go on for months, was not because there was anything necessarily wrong. It was more just preventative maintenance, which I like. I don't like restoring cars. I really like preserving them. And so that's the great thing that Bruce Buchanan did, was just say, look, you want to preserve, you want to not restore, but you want to make sure that the maintenance is brought up to speed, with a couple of exceptions at the end where I just lost patience. And that's what we did, and it was fantastic. And my goodness gracious, it does run very well. And it runs very much better than the S4 I had before this. I did speak to Anthony at Auto House when I was buying it and sort of said, is it really the GTS really that much better? And he said, yes, actually it is. And when I got it and I've been driving it a little now, I really have to say that it is much, much better. So, with the exception of all the time that it was with Bruce, the only other thing I've done is, of course, clean this thing to within an inch of its life. And as you can see here, the seats are just absolutely, and the interior is absolutely exceptional. When it was delivered, it did have that funny other steering wheel on it. And the gear changer remains. The steering wheel's gone. I was able to get an OEM original out of the States, and but everything else on the interior is really, really good. And the exterior as well is cleaned up incredibly well. Looks fantastic, and now with Bruce's help, I think everything sort of works. The one non-standard item on this car is, of course, this exhaust, and hilariously, it's a Gambella exhaust, and so it's got the dual outlets, which, you know, I don't think no one likes things that aren't standard, but if you've got to have things that aren't standard, make sure it's Gambella, right? But apart from that, that's what the car is at the moment. It's really fantastic. And unfortunately, it is for sale because, of course, along the way, I ended up with a chance to buy another Singapore car, but it's got 48,000 Ks on it. And so I'm going to sell one of them, but at the moment, the black one with 48,000 Ks is still being worked on, and this one's finished. And so at the moment, this one's for sale. Just a little on the driving experience on the GTS. The first thing I'd say is it's really, well, it's not a 911 certainly, but it's noticeably different to the S4 that I had. I think that was an 88 and this is 93. 5 years, maybe you wouldn't think it makes much difference, but it's just a much more contemporary ride you get with this thing. It's 133,000 kilometres. So not a lot of kilometres certainly by 928 standards, but just the driving experience seems so much more contemporary and much more agile. So while I would have said the S4 really was maybe pigeonholed as a GT car, and while this car's certainly still, I guess, a GT, this car's just got heaps more get up and go, and is a much more sensitive style of drive. So yeah, it certainly is a different driving experience to an S4, and much more contemporary and much more sporty, and it feels a lot more powerful. I don't know if my S4 was a bit old and worn out, and this one's just in a lot better condition, but the GTS, of course, had the 5.4 litre engine, and it really does go, and feels much faster car to drive. The other point I think to make about these GTS is just their price. So, 928s have always been difficult to price, right? Because they start at about $20,000 for something that will need so much money spent on it. Up to, I think, the last couple advertised in Australia for GTSs, there was two GTS for sale for 120 odd and $130,000. They may have been Aussie delivered, and still in Australia there's this premium that you get for an Aussie delivered car. God knows why, because I think of all cars, GTS in particular are sort of global assets these days. But the point I want to make is, so this is a Singapore car. It's got history, but not delivered in Australia. Singapore via New Zealand. And what's it worth? Clearly there aren't a lot of right-hand drive GTS anywhere, and so that's the first thing, I guess, that matters. And secondly, it's in, this one's in particularly lovely condition. The interior is exceptional, and it drives beautifully now. But maybe 100,000 sounds like a lot for a 928. what sort of 911 do you get for 100 grand? I guess you get a 997, right? And it's probably a Tiptronic. It's certainly not a manual 997. You'd get a manual 996, but for whatever reason people don't like them, incorrectly in my view. But you know, that's about it. And everything else in terms of 911's more than that. And of course, you know, there's 911s everywhere. Everyone's got a 911. But to get a 928 GTS is a genuinely unique vehicle. And therefore, you kind of feel, well, why the hell are they still only $100,000? Which is almost entry-level 911, and so much more collectible, and certainly in this GTS form, a pretty fantastic drive. You know, enormous reserves of power, and at speed, this thing's going to be a much greater sort of interstate proposition than a 911 sort of buzzing away behind you and threatening to throw you off the road at any particular point in time. So I actually think at 100 grand, these 928s are actually super good value and a great alternative to, as I say, a run-of-the-mill or an entry-level 911. So, are they worth 100 grand? I think through rarity and so on, the answer is obviously, at the moment, yes. But actually, I think that's missing the point. The point is this, especially in the GTS, it's a great driving experience. It's certainly markedly different to the S4s, and equally as much fun, you know, if for different reasons, to any 911 that you can buy for 100 grand, and certainly a lot more comfortable, a lot more practical. But you know, as I say, a lot more fun, lots of power. You know, a really great experience, and so particularly this one, I think worth 100 grand.